All this talk about El Nino, where are we now and how are we progressing? Jeff and I will address some of these issues in the November edition of the Water Resources Outlook.
Okay, taking a look at the 30-day departures from normal for precipitation, and we can see that a large part of the southeast is running well above normal, with much of the precipitation contribution with the storm we had at the beginning of November. Wherever you see the purple there, that is where we are 4 inches above normal for the past 30 days, and many of these same areas are areas where we had flooding in the past month. Florida is the only area where we've been fairly quiet when it comes to wet weather. Looking at some individual locations since the beginning of the year, we see the green line there. That's the observed precipitation since January 1st, and the brown line, that is the normal precipitation, the typical normal precipitation since January 1st. And we see for Birmingham, Alabama, pretty much near normal for the year so far. Going east to Atlanta, a little different scene, as since June 1st, staying fairly wet. South to Orlando, Florida, near normal through most of the summer. Then early fall brought wet weather, and so far late fall has been pretty dry. Going north to Charleston, South Carolina, and you see they're normal through most of the year, and then we had a pretty good event in September, and the historical event in October, and another event here in early November, so a very wet fall for the Charleston, South Carolina area. Just going a little north and west to Charlotte, and we see they have been pretty dry through most of the summer and early fall, but late fall has brought some reprieve, and now they are back to normal. Raleigh, North Carolina. Let's look at Raleigh, North Carolina. Again, wet from the summer on. And finally, Roanoke, Virginia. Again, wet from summer on, and late fall has brought some fairly large wet events. And all this rainfall, of course, has had an influence on stream flows, and that is what you see here, well above normal stream flows across most of the Carolinas down through Georgia and into Alabama. Most of the Florida stream flows are running near normal as far as the 28-day average, with the St. Johns River running slightly below normal, as depicted by the orange color there in east central Florida. When looking at the reservoirs across the southeast, just as you would have expected, most are near their target. Here across Alabama, we see all the lakes within a foot of their target pool. In Georgia, Lake Linney are running above the target pool this morning with all the past rainfall events. The lake had been running below target for most of the end of the summer, but this rain in late fall has helped the lake to get above guide curve. Other lakes, as you can see, all above target by a foot or more, except there W.F. George in the south. Now working east into South Carolina, again the Savannah lakes are all in good shape, running near or above pool. Thurman running 2 feet above their target pool. And finally, looking at some of the core lakes in North Carolina as well as Lake Norman, we see the lakes all running at or above target. So the good thing is that many of the hydropower companies have had plenty of water to generate. I guess the bad thing here, Todd, is that many of the core lakes may not have as much storage if we get more rain in the coming weeks and need to try to mitigate downstream flooding.
Thanks for that, Jeff. So how does this translate to the U.S. Drought Monitor in the southeast? Well, less than 1% of the area is in D1 drought, moderate drought, and less than 10% of the southeast is showing abnormally dry. This product was produced before the recent rainfall, and therefore may show even less in next week's edition. I'll be taking the reins this week for the meteorology, and it will not be of the expertise we usually get from Ian or Christopher. However, the next week does look pretty dry due to high pressure centered over the southeast. After the recent rainfall, this should be a nice break from what has been a pretty wet fall for most of the southeast. Well, here's the 7-day rainfall forecast from the Weather Prediction Center, and other than Florida, this is a pretty dry forecast for the week for the rest of the southeast. The front that brought all the rain to the southeast this week has moved into Florida and is hanging out there bringing rain to the area. It should move out in a few days and will be drier there also. A little further out and getting into early December, there is a chance for us to be more wet. However, different models are hinting at different solutions right now, and some models have the southeast being below normal in rainfall through the rest of November. This is good news, as this El Nino event that we have been talking about is expected to start controlling our weather pattern in the coming weeks and months. It will be wet, as our December outlook shows. The Climate Prediction Center is still expecting us to have a wet December based on the model output that has a strong El Nino influence. Now it seems that it might be just a matter of time before a wet pattern begins to develop. Our seasonal forecast from December through February looks very much the same as we have been showing recently, with wet weather expected this winter. As we continue into the spring, wetness continues, but it isn't as strong a signal as El Nino begins to weaken, and a normal late spring and early summer rainfall are likely during this time. And so, our bottom line, in the short term, it looks quieter for most of the southeast as high pressure keeps the area drier than we have seen lately, and this could continue through the early part of December. As for the long term, El Nino will continue to dominate the long-term forecast, and we will be watching very closely to see if a more classic El Nino pattern develops. And when it does, we expect that we will start getting rain on a more frequent basis and potentially see flooding from that rainfall. Our next water resources outlook will be done on the week of December 7th, so look for that. Thank you for listening to this month's Water Resources Outlook. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, please refer them to me at todd.hamill@noaa.gov or Jeffrey Dober at jeffrey.dober@noaa.gov. Again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next month.